And here he is every Wednesday. It feels like a Monday for us. We had a big long weekend. Brendan, welcome back.
Martin, nice to talk to you again, yeah.
Just meandering cricket match at the moment. Have you got it on in the background or not?
Yeah, I have, yeah. I mean, it's an embarrassment all around, isn't it? I mean, if the Black Caps don't win this by an innings and about 200 questions might be asked, but wherever you look, it's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment, particularly, I think, to the ICC, because it's sort of undermining the credibility of this World Test Championship, which they've invested so much time and money and effort over the years. It's an embarrassment to South African cricket, and it's kind of a bit of an embarrassment for New Zealand cricket as well. I mean, hardly anyone's going to the match. I imagine the television ratings are pretty ordinary. And so you have to wonder why South Africa have been able to get away with this. Why have the ICC not slapped some sort of really heavy penalty? Maybe they will in time. But you'd think they should be losing World Test Championship points for what they've done here. I remember you saying a couple of weeks ago you were calling them the South African E-team, and I thought that's a bit of an exaggeration. But then I read in the last few days that apparently the top 50 players in South Africa were excluded from selection. So I'm kind of reversing that and thinking, what sort of team would we send? What sort of side would the Black Caps look like if we didn't pick the top 56 players in New Zealand cricket? I think you and I might almost make the squad.
Well, Brendan, I was saying, that over the weekend, I'm comparing it to like the Black Caps playing a New Zealand A side, and some of the cricket shots that I've witnessed today, I mean, and no disrespect to the women that play the Super Smash, but it's like watching some of the cricket I saw in that. I mean, honestly, it's worse than club cricket. And I just watched a guy hit a six then. I mean, he had no idea where the ball's going. Look, you're exactly right. However, as far as New Zealand goes, we've got no choice but to just get out there, thrash this team, and then thrash them again, and then send them back to South Africa. And the most pleasing thing for me about it, and we'll talk about ration and we'll also talk about Kane's centuries, is that this is one of those precious records in world sport, which means something to me and my generation and you, I hope, that South Africa had never lost a test series to New Zealand. Didn't matter what team we'd sent there or they'd come here, right? Now they're going to lose one. And so it's like the All Blacks losing to Argentina and Ireland and those 100-year records. And I look at the players, they don't look as though they give a stuff about it. And I just wonder with South Africa, this is the stuff that sport's built upon. This is the history, the tradition in there.
I know,
if that doesn't mean anything, well, why are you playing test cricket, you morons?
If I was the head of South African cricket, and I'm sure he's been watching this because that's his job, he must feel terribly embarrassed. I think what he should be doing is calling his selectors in and saying, look, I don't care how important you think this T20 competition is in South Africa at the moment. I want to see 6 leading players on a plane to New Zealand now in time for the second test to try and salvage something out of this series. We could still square this series if we had even a few players, maybe not even half a dozen, just 3 or 4 leading players in this side to get something out of this series. But I don't imagine it's going to happen because the power of the dollar or the rand, doesn't matter where you are, prevails over everything else.
Well, you just think of the excuses that they use to wash or try and get past us, right? Oh, it's so vitally important for every level of South African cricket that the South African T20 series is played. Well, in that case, I want to see some accounts. I want to see how many crowds are going, what kind of revenue you've got, where that revenue is dispersed, because you can't tell me that they couldn't take most of their best players, leave them here and leave the rest back there. It's only 2 bloody tests, Brendan. I mean, how many T20s do they miss during that time? It's just horse rubbish is what it is we get fed, isn't it?
I mean, they could have even kind of sort of doubled up, say, like send 6 players for the first test, send them home to get them back to their precious T20 and bring another few out. But the ICC,
their white cricket balls are now held in a glass beside the BCCI's bed, don't they? It just seems that, mate, I look at it the same way, Brendan, is that, and I got really irate on Thursday about this, Mark Robinson standing up there in a press conference for New Zealand Rugby telling us all what a great idea it is to take the Fiji test to San Diego. Not one reporter in that room prepared to challenge him on that and go, hang on a second, you keep harping on about giving back to Pacific Island rugby. You send Super Rugby sides up there every second week during the season and you reckon you haven't had time to organise this? What a load of rubbish, mate. Come on. I mean, surely that test should be played in Fiji.
Well, it should. I mean, they're rugby's a national sport. They're just as passionate out there as we are about rugby. But I suppose, at least in that instance there, Robinson or the rugby union could point to the fact by taking it up to wherever it's going to in America that Fiji are going to get a lot more money out of the test match than they would if it was played in Suva. So, it's...
Mate, it's just, he doesn't make the decision. That's the truth. It's been made by Silver Lake or it's been made by World Rugby or it's out of his hand. I mean, I just wish you'd be honest about it and say, listen, we all think it'd be a great idea, but we don't actually decide this one. We've signed a contract with Silver Lake and they decide that the All Blacks machine has got to go and play it. I mean, he came out with all this crap about, we need to sort of put some stakes in the ground before the 2031 Rugby World Cup. Well, Brendan, that's 7 years. Can you remember who the All Blacks played in 2017, 7 years ago? Do you think anyone in the States is going to remember? We played the Lions here. No. It's just rubbish, mate. I'll tell you what, another one. Here's another one before we get on to Barry John and things. So we're listening to our news service, which comes from News Talk ZB at the moment, right? And in the headline in the sports news, Lachlan, what was it about Ricky Ponting? Read this for a headline. And this was across Stuff, News Talk ZB, and I think TV3, I think News Hub ran exactly the same headline.
Hold fire. Just grabbing it now.
As soon as you hear the headline, Brendan, you're going to know that this is what appeared on the top of a press release, and some the journalists across all of these newsrooms, this is where the young and experienced, no one's got any kind of historical knowledge or balls to say this is rubbish, right? This is the headline.
Major League Cricket has landed the most prominent signing of its short history, with Ricky Ponting joining the Washington Freedom as coach.
See, brilliant. Okay, your reaction the same as mine. So what, people are going to buy a ticket to go and watch the coach, are they? Brilliant. I mean, what a load of rot.
Is he 50 yet?
Yeah.
Ponting?
I mean, he's a coach, mate. He's not even playing.
Yeah.
This is just verbatim. It's just landed on somebody's desk and the editor says, write a story about this. So they just reprint the headline and that's actually masquerades as news. Anyway, 172 for 4. Give me a prediction. When are we going to bowl these buggers out, mate?
Oh, well, it's only a matter of time. I just hope there isn't a 6-wicket stand of 364 between a couple of these guys, and they get to within 100 of the total. But the other thing here, it has cast, and no one really has mentioned this, and it's probably a bit of a follow-on from what you've just been talking about. No one has mentioned the fact that, with all due respect to the 200s that Kane Williamson got, they'd be the easiest 200s he scored in his 31 Test centuries. And even Ravindra is 240. There's question marks over it because of the opposition. And before I launch into peons of praise of certainly Ravindra, I want to see how he goes against these Aussie quicks. Because I imagine Cummings, Stark and Hazelwood are licking their chops thinking, we're going to put this guy in his place when we get there. They may not, because Ravindra does have something. We saw that at the Cricket World Cup, and that wasn't just a one-off.
No. He's got and
the 240 will sit there on the record books forever and a day, for sure, the 12th highest score by a New Zealander in a Test match. But I'm just holding off for another month before I join the chorus on Ravindra.
Sure, okay.
And
but
Williamson, sure.
It's home pitches, though. I mean, look, if we were going to Australia, I'd probably agree with you, but it's our home pitches here. I know that, the last time we beat Australia in a cricket test was in Hobart in 2011. We've only won 8 in total against them the whole bloody time. So, surely at home, this bats our guys into form. In terms of Kane, look, I just look at it like, yeah, he's got maybe a couple of gimme centuries here, but you don't get 31 gimme centuries, do you? And you don't get to be 13th on that list. And Brendan, he's hit half of his centuries away from home out in New Zealand. So he deserves his place in the upper echelon.
But I just noticed when he was batting, I think it probably was a bit too easy for him. And so he was playing quite a few loose shots, which you don't see from Williamson. He got dropped. He gave 2 sitters and 1 in each innings when he was on 40 and 60 yesterday, which was out of character of the guy. And I think against Australia, when he knows he's got to concentrate fully on every ball, there'll be better innings to watch. And also I heard Craig McMillan saying, which I thought was a good point made the other day, he was having difficulty finding gaps in the field. I mean, he's been away and out with injuries for so much that, you could expect that. But I think also, just one other thing about Williamson, I have a feeling, and I don't know where this has come from, and he wouldn't admit it publicly, but I think in the privacy of his own mind, he might see an opportunity here for four Test centuries in 4 innings. The record, I think, is 5. A guy called Everton Weeks, who you probably don't remember.
No, West Indian player, Brendan, back in the 50s, wasn't he? Yeah.
In the late 40s and 50s. He scored 5 Test centuries in 5 successive Test innings. A couple of other guys like Jack Callis and I think Mohammad Yunus, the Pakistani, have scored 5 Test centuries in 5 Tests, but only one player has scored 5 in a row. So
Maybe.
Williams could really, in fact, I'd interested to see what the TAB would pay if they were putting a book on. Will Kane Williams get 2 centuries in the second test to make it 4 from 4? How much do you think they'll be paying on that?
Oh, I tell you what, to beat Australia, we're going to need that guy to do that. He's going to have to be...
I'm saying he can get another 2 tests next week, centuries. 4 from 4. He's got 2 from 1 test, and you get another 2 next week.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay,
yeah,
right. And then, of course, he only had to hit 1 against Australia in the first test. I see what you mean, yeah. Look, I was watching. Look, and it's you always feel like a bit of a naysayer when you say, "Oh, we're only playing this opposition." But I think you've got to make that point when assessing this seriously, because yes, you still have to beat those opposition, you still have to score the runs, you still have to bowl them out, all of that. But this team would be, I think, a New Zealand A side at best is what we're playing for South Africa.
Well, I'm not even sure whether it'll be up to that standard. Actually, if it's the top 50 have been wiped off, God, you got to
56, Brendan. That's 56,
right.
mate. That's 5 separate teams they could have been. So you're actually, when I said it was a G team and I was, being facetious about it, I wasn't that far off, was I?
No, you weren't actually. I thought at the time that was just Devlin doing one of his hypo exaggerations again, but I thought it might have been the B team or the C team. I thought there only would have been 10 or 11 that weren't coming.
No, 56.
So that's basically every first-class cricketer in New Zealand would not be available.
No, wouldn't be available. Yeah, that's it. That's why we'd get the call. Yeah.
You're going down to the Hawke Cup to have a look at where you could pick a New Zealand cricket team. But and it'll just sort of kind of tail off and disappear because money prevails and money talks, and so no one will.
Shame, eh? It is such a shame.
Yeah.
Having said that, I actually think the crowds for a couple of days I saw over the weekend were pretty good, and apparently because it's free to air, they are getting good viewing figures. New Zealand cricket's biggest problem is when this contract from Spark runs out, they're not giving it away for free anymore, Brendan. They have to sell it. So who gets it? Does Sky go back in and get it? In which case people are going to be paying for it again. So enjoy it while it lasts. Let's talk about Barry John. 79, died across the weekend. Now, I've just done a little bit of, flicking around on this. He only played 25 matches for Wales and 5 for the Lions. And yet this guy's legend of being the greatest to wear that number 10 jersey has existed ever since. I made the mistake. I thought he'd also played the 74 Lions tour to South Africa, but no, he actually retired really early on. I think he was only in his 20s when he retired. But people call him the king.
27, I think.
Why is that?
Well, he was. He probably was, as a couple of British rugby writers have said, not just one of the greatest number 10s, so they call them fly halves, we call them first 5, but the greatest of all time. And I'd go along with it. I do remember that tour of 1971 when he came in. He, not just him, and Carwyn James as well, as really inspirational coach that they had, who was a Welshman as well. They completely changed the whole manner of rugby in this country because of the rugby they played. And I remember one match in particular, Wellington, because I lived in Wellington at the time. They beat Wellington, who was, we didn't have a national championship or anything like that in those days, but they were one of the 2 top teams in the country. And before the first test against the Lions in Dunedin, they thrashed this Wellington side by 47 points to 9, the biggest defeat any Wellington team ever suffered at the hands of a visiting side. And the backline they had that day, which basically was their test backline, it might have even been a week before the first test, I can't remember now, but they had 5 Welshmen in that backline. Gareth Edwards at halfback, Barry John at first 5, and then they had Mike Gibson and David Duckham in the centres, and then Gerald Davies on one wing, John Bevan on the other, who got 4 tries that day, and JPR Williams at fullback. And all of those guys, most of those guys in that backline became legends because they played around Barry John. He was, to put it quite simply, he was Dan Carter plus the 1970s.
Yeah, okay, but why? Why was he that good?
Well, it was his footwork. It was his sense of where the ball was, where space was. He had an amazing ability to find space, very little space, and he would work his way through it. He could run, he could slide, he could glide, he was just a brilliant player, and he had these other players around him who fed off him, and that's why they became the only Lions side ever to have won the All Blacks in the Test series. And the coach is going back to the Wellington game because it was so kind of significant. The coach of the Wellington team that day was a guy you probably remember if you go back into your memory far enough, a guy called Bill Freeman, who was a legendary rugby coach in Wellington. And he said after the game that my philosophy on playing rugby has completely changed because of what I saw today.
Wow.
And he said... And what he was getting at was Carwyn James's theory, which he put into practice on the rugby fields of New Zealand, is that you attack with the ball from anywhere on the field. This idea of playing 10-man rugby until you get into the opposition half and then you might move the ball a bit went out the window with the Lions in 71. It didn't matter whether they were on their own goal line, their own 22 or 25, as it probably was then. Wherever they had the ball, they attacked from. And it startled the opposition. They weren't ready for it. They didn't know how to counter it. And they won the series, although the All Blacks, won one match and drew one in that series. But against Wellington that day, it transformed rugby. Remember, my father used to talk about the Wellington game against the Lions, and this Wellington side were just blown off the field.
That's in the days also, of course, where A, there were tours, and B, that we put our strongest teams up. Like the Wellington provincial side was the strongest version of. Like these days, when the Lions play, they play a Super Rugby side minus all its All Blacks and things. Back in those days, you had when the Lions test team wasn't playing people, their players still played. These tours went for 20 or 30 matches, didn't they? And they actually fronted up and played. Brendan, what was the atmosphere like back in New Zealand then? Because we'd gone to Africa in 1970 thinking we're going to win under Vodanovic, I think was the coach, and B.G. Williams played that tour, remember, his first, and we lost that one 3-1, and then the Lions came out the next year, beat us in a series. Geez, it must have been a pretty grim and glum sporting environment.
It was, and this is why what the Lions did a huge favour to New Zealand rugby, because they showed us the way rugby should be played. And teams, Wellington was the first with Bill Freeman to transform the way they played the game. And I think you can look now over the years. We look back over the last 20 or 30 years, and all the great All Black sides. Regardless of who the coach was, were at their best when they played attacking rugby.
Yeah, good point.
And you can trace a lot of that back to this lonely and clever figure called Carwyn James, who was found dead in a bath in a hotel in Amsterdam when he was about 51 or 52 years of age.
Hello.
It turns out, there were all these speculations about this guy, and he had a lot of, I think, mental health problems in the latter part of his life.
Poor thing.
Mate,
I tell you what, if you're dying in a bath in Amsterdam, Brendan, that's rock and roll, isn't it? Come on.
But in fact, post-mortem showed that he died of a heart attack, and he was, unfortunately, he was in Amsterdam on his own, and no one kind of knew that the guy was missing. It was 2 or 3 days before they even checked his room.
What a sad story.
It was. But he was one of the greatest and most astute men that ever coached a rugby team. And that Welsh side, that backline in 1971, 5 Welshmen in that backline, and Barry Johns and Gareth
Edwards. See how times have changed, though. Because look, I remember the 77 Lions tour, obviously, and then we went on that Grand Slam tour of 1978, and the Welsh test was the one you had to win. They were the team to beat. How times have changed, isn't it? Because look, I watched Ireland-France on the weekend, and I watched a bit of Wales-Scotland. That Ireland-France game, once again, destroyed by a red card. And I wanted to finish on this because we talked to Justin Marshall about this as well, Brendan. The bonehead Locke Willems for France deserved his 2 yellows in the red, no question. But ultimately, when you're watching rugby, if it's 14 versus 15, the only people that lose are us, the paying spectators. And I don't know what... I'm not criticising World Rugby because of the rules. They've got to get the head contact out of the game. We know that. But surely, I don't know, is the Super Rugby rule the answer where they stay off at 20 and then you replace the player? Because it is destroyed as a spectacle. You can't deny that.
It's true, yeah. It's always been the case. But what's the answer?
Well, I don't know. In Super Rugby, you have that kind of an orange card where the guy goes off for 20, then you can replace him. So the team still has to battle. It's just that the result when 14 play 15 in a rugby test.
Yeah.
It seems such a shame. You've had the World Cup final happened. Now you've got this game, which is the biggest game of the Six Nations, has happened. And this is the shop window of World Rugby.
But the problem is that there's just not a kind of answer that, if you put in place, works in favour of the team that's been hurt. So this is my problem, that I can't work out what you could do to fit the penalty for someone who's done a foul act that the team has to suffer. And I suppose that's the argument that they put forward. Rugby's a team sport, and an individual can ruin it for the whole team. But any other penalty doesn't quite work, doesn't seem appropriate enough for the foul play that someone might have committed. So it's discipline. I suppose that's what it is. You've got to be able to produce and instill discipline in your players so that situation doesn't arise. But it's so easy for referees to give red cards these days that there are instances that we know where players get a red card, which is unfair, really, but the referee would argue he didn't have any choice.
Yeah, look, it's just a groan fest. As soon as it goes up to the TMO and he's checking it, and then they frame by frame, I was just sitting there going, oh no, because I was so looking forward to that France-Ireland game, because these are two beaten quarterfinalists. You know, it's probably the final of the Six Nations in the very first game. I love the Six Nations. I know that you do too, and you just think, here we go, here we bloody go again. All right, mate, that wraps it up for today, eh? So what else is on the agenda? I mean, we're going to obviously talk next Wednesday. The Super Bowl's on Monday. You've got a Super Bowl party planned at the Telfs, have you?
No, I would doubt if I even watch it.
Oh, what do you mean? Come, Brendan, come on. It's one of the biggest events in the world, mate.
No, it isn't. It's a big, hyped-up event in the United States, and little sycophants like you and a few others will be glued to your television set, hoping you might see a few shots of Tay-Tay, maybe.
Stop it. Look, I, of course, am a grumpy old man on that. I love the Super Bowl, mate, because I obviously follow an NFL team, and I love it, but...
I tell you what, I put it on a par with. The Bathurst 1000. I always watch
here we go.
I watched the last hour maybe of Bathurst after the news went on that particular Sunday night, but I can't sit through 6 hours of that stuff. And a bit like this thing here.
Mate, I can't watch the second round of a PGA tournament. You'll sit through all of that.
Yes, of course I will. Yes, and more.
But you won't sit through Live Golf.
No, I won't sit through Live Golf. But I'll watch a bit of it. It's on about 12:30 in the afternoon. Yeah. And it goes till about 6 o'clock, doesn't it? Takes about 6 hours for a game of rugby in America, doesn't it? Or
something. I think about football. 4 hours, mate. They milk every single second out of it. Brendan, thanks so much, mate. It's courtesy of JK's World of Golf every Wednesday on this program.